Wedding Crashers isn't just the greatest comedy ever made, it might just be the greatest movie ever made. The iconic comedy movie from 2005 starring Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson crushed it at the box office and is also the rare comedy movie that performed well with both critics and audiences. But what is it about Wedding Crashers that makes it so special? Some of these reasons are likely things that you would never think of, and reason number 10 proves that Hollywood's excuse for ditching R-rated comedies is complete nonsense. Starting off at number 1, and probably the most obvious, is that this movie just has an all-star cast. Chemistry between Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson as the two leads is impeccable, but we've also got quite the shining performances from Christopher Walken, Jane Seymour, Rachel McAdams, and Bradley Cooper. And then, of course, Will Ferrell makes his iconic cameo towards the end of the film. Yeah, I mean, you've got something really special when you've got just so much talent in the supporting cast as well. Really, when you get this strong of a comedic cast together, that's going to be the biggest ingredient altogether to putting forth such a great comedy movie. It's really not very common that you can get these many strong comedic actors all together, all of whom could have been starring in their own comedy movie. All the performances in this movie really shine. And then reason number 2, the second part of this equation, the crew of the writers and director on this movie as well were A+. Steve Faber and Bob Fisher are the 2 credited writers on this movie, and they do a very strong job at crafting a comedic film that is not just funny, but has a lot of heart to it and has a very strong story structure and just plot overall and theme. That is the kind of thing that you'll see missing in a lot of comedy movies. But it wasn't just Steve and Bob. John Lucas and Scott Moore, who are most well known for writing the Hangover trilogy and to a lesser extent the Change Up, they came in and did uncredited rewrites on this movie, so they're not on the marquee, they're not on the poster, they're not even on the IMDb credits. They definitely take it to the next level, and I think that that's something that's so great about this era of comedy that we see shine in the Wedding Crashers in particular, is that there was so much more attention to detail, but the studio really went out of their way to make sure that Wedding Crashers was the best movie possible and had the best script possible going into production. And then, of course, David Dobkin is just a phenomenal comedic director. He also directed The Change Up, which was written by the aforementioned Scott Moore and John Lucas, and he really just has a knack for getting the strongest performances, the strongest comedic performances out of his actors, just as he does with Jason Bateman, Ryan Reynolds, and Leslie Mann in The Change Up. He does it 10 times over with Vince Vaughn, Owen Wilson, Christopher Walken, Jane Seymour, Rachel McAdams, Bradley Cooper, and just every performance on the screen in this movie. That finishing touch to make sure just everything meshes together and we get just the best product possible on screen is that strong director. And David Dobkin was really the perfect person to direct this movie. And staying on this tangent into reason number 3, and that's that David Dobkin gave the cast a ton of freedom with this movie. I learned a lot about this in my conversations with Larry Joe Campbell, who plays the best man in the movie, and then Marcus Dreek, who worked on the crew of this movie and was also an extra in the movie, when they talk about all of the freedom that David gave the cast. For example, Larry Joe Campbell's scene in this movie where he gives his toast, he mentioned was just cut down to just a couple of lines. Him and his agent collectively asked David Dobkin, like, is there any way we can just shoot the whole scene, and if there's anything you don't like, can you cut it? And David Dobkin approved the request. And, I'm not sure how many directors would do that.
Craig was the only one who still believed in me. Been sober now for 8 months.
And ended up not being the 2 lines that were cut down to in the final script. David Dobkin gave Vince Vaughn the freedom to choose his own best man in the movie. As I learned from Marcus Dreek in our interview, he mentions that there actually was an original best man. On set, Vince requested that his best man actually be the brother of Claire in the movie. And, I think from a story perspective, it made a lot of sense. And of course, Dave Dobkin gave his cast the freedom to improv, and that's really, you're going to get a lot of great comedic moments from improv. And this transitions as well into reason number 4, and that is Vince Vaughn's improv skills. I mean, this movie would not be what it is if Vince Vaughn was not starring it. And not just that, if he wasn't given the freedom to improv, this movie would be nowhere near the level that it is. It wouldn't get the number of laughs that it does.
Are they talking enough? Am I interested? I'm not really interested. Should I play like I'm interested, but I'm not that interested, but I think she might be?
Vince Vaughn is, in my opinion, the greatest improviser of all time. I read this screenplay, and a lot of Vince's dialogue is just not in the movie. It's variations of what's on page, but it just flows a lot better. It's better in his voice. And sometimes there are just lines of dialogue where there was nothing even remotely close to that on the script.
You hug each other like this and the ass sticks out.
And that transitions into reason number 5, and that this movie is just hilarious. You know, it's really a combination of everything we've kind of talked about so far, and that the writing's on point, the directing's on point, acting is even more on point. I don't know how many times I've seen this movie, but it never ceases to amaze me how I'm just laughing from start to finish every single time. You know, there are so many comedy movies that I love where I think about it like the first time I watched it, and this movie was just hilarious. And then I watched it again like a year later, and it's funny, but it's nowhere near as funny as it was the first time. But like Wedding Crashers, it's like, at this point I know exactly what's going to happen, and I know a lot of the dialogue by heart, and it is just as funny as it was the first time. And when you can do that and also like just be an all-around strong script as well, aside from the comedy, like, yeah, that'll take your movie to the next level. And playing off of this, to reason number 6, you know, this movie wasn't conformed to any politically correct standards. They really just everyone, the writers, the actors, directing, everything was just done from a perspective of what is the funniest thing possible we can do. You know, Vince Vaughn talked about this in a recent interview. He mentioned how there were no quote-unquote parents on set, and how, you know, it was more of a game of what can we get away with. It wasn't, we need to tread this line carefully, and certain people we can't joke about, whatever. It was just full-on freedom. That is definitely another reason why this movie is what it is. And getting into reason number 7, just playing off of that thought, it was constant laughs, but it wasn't randomness. This movie had clear meaning, and the humor drives the plot forward. If you think of all of the iconic scenes, there is meaning behind every scene in this movie. When you think about the iconic family dinner scene, when you think about the scene between Kat and John, when you think about the football game, there was meaning behind that, and whether the characters were getting further developed or the stakes were being raised, everything was very carefully crafted in this film. Never just having a joke or a funny scene that was just there just so we could take a break from the movie and laugh. Like, this was all very much here to move the plot forward and develop the story and characters. And into reason number 8, there's just never a dull moment in this movie, and again, that's just such a rarity. I mean, I can think of so many movies that I love. Maybe there's a scene here or there that drags too long. Maybe a scene that was this really needed. You know, you get none of that with Wedding Crashers. The movie really starts with action, with fun. I mean, we have the mediation scene, just a hilarious way to start the movie, and we jump straight into establishment of what they're doing, the crashing of the weddings, and we have so much fun doing it. You jump on the roller coaster right at the beginning, and you don't get off until the credits roll. They just had such a special way of telling the story and just being so thoroughly engaging from start to finish. And then getting into reason number 9, and something that probably doesn't come at the forefront of most people's minds, and that's that each character's wants, needs, and goals are developed to the point where we actually care about the characters on screen. You know, by the end of the movie, we are genuinely rooting for John and Claire's relationship to succeed. Even the extent to Vince's and Isla's relationship come to fruition. And you know, it's not the easiest thing to do, to get that level of emotion where you're genuinely feeling for the characters and rooting for them and fully bought into this world. With comedy, it's really harder than ever to really be able to get all those laughs, then to also get the audience to a point where they're actually caring about everyone. A lot of these comedy movies, especially from this era and with this style of humor, they're either really funny, but maybe the plot and character development and all that jazz isn't the greatest, or just everything to do with the story and theme, like that's really strong, but as a result, maybe it's not the funniest movie. Maybe it's only got a few moments that we really love and really laugh at. This movie just has the specialty of we laugh so hard at, but also a movie that we care so much about. And then this gets into reason number 10, which I mentioned in the beginning. Then this proves that the excuse that Hollywood gives for not making R-rated comedy movies anymore is complete nonsense. And that's that this movie is a 4-quadrant movie. If you're not familiar, the 4 quadrants are males age 25 and above, males under 25, females age 25 and above, and females under 25. And the general rule of thumb is that you want to hit at least 2 quadrants, but the magic number is to hit all 4 quadrants. And, you know, a lot of these movies are seen as 2 or 1 quadrant movies. They're seen as not being able to have that universal appeal, and this movie definitely has the appeal for all 4 quadrants. I mean, of course, there's going to be someone out there that doesn't like this movie. No one's going to love every movie. Art is subjective. But I mean, this movie, it really tackles universal themes and hits us with shared communal experiences and emotions that everyone feels. You know, everyone's been to a wedding. Everyone has had a best friend. Everyone will fall in love at some point. These are what connect with audiences so strongly. Vince Vaughn was talking on a podcast about how, like, when he was coming up through the industry, the existing IP to Hollywood, instead of like the board game Battleship, would be a girl turning 16 because everyone turns 16 years old at some point. And, you know, I think that's a lot of what's gotten lost in this current era of cinema that we're going through. It seems like the studios are so hell-bent on what Marvel superhero can we put on the big screen next? What movie hasn't gotten a sequel in a long time that has done really well? But we've really just lost things we can all connect to and relate to, and, you know, this movie does this so well. We all know Jeremy Gray. We all know a John Beckwith. Like, this is why this movie will stand the test of time, is because with this movie being centered around all these universal themes, it's like just such a perfect combination to a perfect movie. And now that you know all of the ingredients that make Wedding Crashers the perfect movie, you might be surprised to learn that if it wasn't for American Pie, we likely never get Wedding Crashers or any of your favorite comedy movies from the 2000s. And I explain exactly why in this video here.